You're supposed to sit here and justify a sneak aggressive preemptive attack? Like somehow you're supposed to feel like you're the good guys in an absolute war of choice against a country that does not have nuclear weapons. Let's get real here. The only country in the Middle East who secretly has nuclear weapons is Israel.
Yes. So recently, Dave Smith went on the Breaking Points podcast to talk about the recent Israeli strike on Iran, why this is a war of choice, why it's disastrous for the U.S. taxpayer and the U.S. citizens, and how much culpability Trump has for this. So let's watch, let's react. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
I mean, there's so much going on there, Dave. There is regime change. There is the flattery and the lies, potentially, about this some so-called Iranian plot to assassinate Trump. And then finally there is the, really buttering it up, but calling Trump to join him in this war on regime change. Just broadly, we want to give you the floor, both to react to that and to the entire situation here.
Yeah, well, it's just you're allowed to throw as many lies at the wall as you want to when you're selling a war. So there's a lot there to kind of unpack. Number one, I would just say, first off, the accusation that Iran was trying to assassinate Donald Trump just doesn't meet the most basic of smell tests. I mean, so you're telling me that the Iranian regime essentially declared war on the United States of America already, tried to murder the sitting president, and yet his response was to try to negotiate with them for a couple months until finally we had Israel attack them. Does that make sense to anybody? They tried to murder Donald Trump and then he entered negotiations with them. Come on, this is too ridiculous.
Yeah, it is ridiculous, and even during Biden's presidency, this assertion was made by several key Republicans when Biden was still in office. They said there's a plot, Iran is trying to assassinate the president, and then there were legitimate talks between Iran and the U.S. They were unilateral. Israel actually wasn't part of those, or supposedly wasn't. So you have this narrative being sold right now that Iran wants to essentially assassinate Trump, which would be bound to draw the United States into a war with Iran, completely decimate it. Would they be willing to risk that? Would they be willing to gamble it? It just doesn't make sense. Dave's right here.
And, you could go back, the thing about Saddam Hussein that a lot of people kind of forget in history is that it is true that at one point Saddam Hussein did have what you could call weapons of mass destruction. He used chemical weapons in his 1980 through 1986 war with Iran and was supported by the United States of America while he did it. He then got rid of those weapons programs, and the neocons and Benjamin Netanyahu himself, you can read in his writing in the 90s when he was telling us that Iran was a few years away from a nuclear weapon all the way back then. But he was also saying that they wanted to overthrow Saddam Hussein for other reasons, for their clean break strategy. You can read about this in the Project for a New American Century, in the Clean Break memo written by Richard Pearl and David Wormser. They talked about this over and over and over again. And then after 9/11, they said the issue here is weapons of mass destruction. But they always wanted the regime change. And so it's the same thing again. The goal here has been regime change in Iran. He's been open about this. He even admitted it a little bit there. But let's just take them, let's just really assess the situation where we are right now.
Yeah, regime change was always the goal. He's long said that. He's long testified to that effect in congressional testimony when you had Netanyahu come in as a regional expert endorsing the overthrow of Saddam. He also said, if you remove Iran too, that'd be darn good. In fact, Iran seemed to have been the highest on Israel's chopping block. But Dave's right about the clean break memo. Wesley Clark went into the Pentagon, saw plans laid out for 7 regime change operations. It was going to be within 5 years, and the last one was Iran. Well, that's the last one left out of the other 6 that have already had regime change operations. Dave's right about the disasters that come from funding proxy wars, and he just named another one. We're seeing one bear out in Ukraine, but also in the 1980s, the U.S. supported Iraq. Iraq invaded Iran. I think it caused about 1 million deaths. And then still Iraq became an enemy of the U.S. So it never bears fruit. It's never helpful. It just garners animosities in the Middle East toward the U.S.
Take them by their own logic. If, as all the hawks are bragging right now, or saying that essentially Israel was already at war with Iran because Iran attacked first on October 7th. their proxies attacked. And what does that mean? You know, it's like when they say Iran is the #1 sponsor of terror. Do they ever have to back that up with data? Do they ever, like, have you ever heard one war hawk who makes the claim that Iran is the #1 sponsor of terror ever, like, show you, look, this is how much terrorists have gotten support from Saudi, and this is how much more they've gotten from Iran? No, they never even feel the need to make this argument. Compare how much money the U.S. has given to terrorist organizations or Israel has given to terrorist organizations.
Like ISIS, in which Operation Timber Sycamore had the U.S. and the CIA and USAID supporting al-Qaeda-linked elements within that country solely to overthrow Assad. That was their goal there. And I think this is more of a technicality, but I think actually it wasn't Iran directly that attacked Israel on October 7th. It was Hamas, and then Hezbollah started to attack the next day, from what I imagine. But in either way, this is an aggression and a strike by Israel, unprovoked, on Iran. And the U.S. is getting sucked into it, and it's devastating for Americans who actually wanted a non-interventionist foreign policy, or at least, at the very least, a more non-interventionist foreign policy. That's what Trump campaigned on. He dragged the neocons. In his campaign, in the last days, he was harping on Liz Cheney, saying if she went up into the front line, she'd know what war would be like more. He got actually a lot of criticism about that because they said, oh, Trump wants to kill Liz Cheney. I mean, the headlines were ridiculous. But anyways, this is exactly what's happening. The U.S. is being sucked into yet another Middle East war that could be prolonged. Iran has far bigger weapons capabilities and more advanced than any of the other powers that the U.S. has attacked in the Middle East since I was born.
Or Israel has facilitated other countries give it. Like there's no objective standard here. But if essentially the standard is because Iran has given Hamas some weapons in the past, therefore they're a proxy, and therefore when they attack Israel on October 7th, Iran has attacked Israel. Well then, what is Israel attacking Iran? Other than the U.S. attacking Iran, right? If that's not, I mean, and come on, and look, this is
proxy state.
Yeah, and same with Ukraine and Russia. It's the same line of argumentation.
So but this one is so much more devastating because it's not just that we give Israel the weapons and the money and the intelligence, but at the very least here, I mean, we had people, we had evacuation orders 24 to 48 hours before the attack came. Donald Trump is speaking out of both sides of his mouth. Netanyahu here is clearly saying that Donald Trump knew this attack was coming. So imagine.
Yeah, all the indications are that the U.S. and Trump did know that this was coming. It seems like many reports have it being at least knowing the definitive date about a week ago from Trump's perspective, and that's probably being charitable. You know, this whole negotiation process with Iran almost seems to be a scam. It almost seems like it could be a ruse. Part of me thinks like there were some genuine overtures at the start, but then, you know, Israel has twisted the U.S. to its will to go along with what the neocons have wanted the entire time, regime change in Iran. And Dave's right. Netanyahu has called openly for regime change there for many years. He even said as of a few weeks ago, it might have been a few months ago, that he wants the Libya model to apply in Iran. Well, what was that? That was when Gaddafi was overthrown by a U.S.-backed NATO coalition. Another episode to prove that NATO is not a defensive alliance. It is an offensive wing of the American empire.
Imagine they had that on Iran with October 7th. They don't have anything close to that. So make no mistake about it, we are at war with Iran right now. The United States of America is. Donald Trump has betrayed MAGA, betrayed America first. He has made the most disastrous decision to lead America into another war. Now, if they want to say that, look, there is an argument here, I suppose, that perhaps Iran is a better candidate for a regime change than Iraq or Libya was. This is the argument they're going to make. It seems a much more compelling argument that we're staring at yet another disaster. And as you were pointing out, Crystal, you know, I heard a little bit of your segment as I was waiting here. Yeah. As you were pointing out, which I think is really the most important point, is that this is the celebrating It's just like unbelievable. It's 24 hours into it. They're all celebrating how easy this was. Look, I remember I was a little kid at the time, but I do vividly remember the celebrations after the Gulf War in 1991. And they were like, look how easy that was. And we didn't take any losses. We went on to be bogged down in that country for 30 years following that war. We all remember the mission accomplishment. We all remember Hillary Clinton saying, we came, we saw, he's dead. A few years later, when she was running for president, she wouldn't dare bring up Libya because it was so obviously a colossal failure. So the people celebrating this right now are just, they've lost their minds.
Yeah, this is exactly right. This is always what we see after the beginnings of these military operations that end in long-term disasters where hundreds of billions of dollars are spent, hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of lives are lost, and it never bears fruit. The regime that comes in is often so much worse than the one before. In those two examples, Libya, you know, there's open market slave trading now. And in Iraq, ISIS took it, and now, you know, it's run by Islamic fundamentalists. So this has never been successful. And most ironically, I think this point is being missed by so many people. And Dave knows about this. These guys know about this. But the Iran coup itself in 1953 was disastrous because it installed the Shah, the Pahlavi dynasty, which created a police state and created a surveillance state, meddled with the individual liberties of the people to a greater extent than Mossadegh was. And, you know, Mossadegh wasn't great, but the big problem there was U.S. intervening. It provoked a reaction amongst fundamentalists who took over the government in 78 and 79. You had the hostage crisis. The U.S. attacked a commercial Iranian flight. It's called Flight 655. Read up about it. So many Americans don't know about that too. They say they mistook it for a F-14, I believe, and then it ended up killing about 290 innocents. So we have this long train of disasters antagonizing Iran. It's now culminating in regime change, and no matter what they want to say, or no matter what the administration says, the U.S. is involved. And under the optics that Trump was really trying to negotiate with Iran, he would be just beyond irate at this point, pissed that the Israelis had undermined his foreign policy. But that's not the avenue he's going. He's celebrating this. He's saying that this was a stunning success, even, you know, quasi-boasting about his role in luring the Iranians into thinking that no attack was coming.
People get swept up in war fever.
The flashbacks, the WMD talk, the like celebratory mission accomplished vibe, in that clip with Bibi, and I've heard so many others say this, they're yearning for freedom. I mean, it's just like, it makes me feel like, has everybody just erased their memories of what happened here? Yeah. It's utterly insane to me. And to your point about...
And I have no doubt that many in Iran might be yearning for freedom, but they aren't owed the treasury of the United States in the process. They don't own the treasury. The U.S. owns the treasury. America first does not mean intervening in the affairs of others. Go back to Thomas Jefferson. In his first inaugural, he said, peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none, should essentially be the American creed. That's what I still want. And that is not just a pipe dream. That actually played out for about a century in the U.S. Yeah, we had the U.S.-Mexico War. We had the U.S.-Spanish War, Spanish-American War. But other than that, for the most part, there was a century of staying out of world affairs and world domination, world empire, and empire building. So yeah, it's not our business to overthrow every, treacherous regime that exists. I think my own government is treacherous in many ways. You can't bankroll that because the extension of that is overthrowing every government. It's only a matter of degrees from which ones are more tyrannical and which ones are not. Some people will order them differently, and none of them are our responsibility.
Our involvement, let's put this next piece up on the screen. We now know that at least the recent discussions about, diplomatic negotiations and, hey, we're going forward with these talks this weekend, was a ruse to provide cover and the element of surprise for the Israelis. So now you have this report. A U.S. official confirmed to me over the weekend Israel had an operational window to assassinate Iran's supreme leader, Khamenei, but President Trump made it clear he is against such a move. This was first reported by Steve Holland. There is no reason for anyone, us, the Iranians, anyone, to believe these reports. I mean, it does also remind me of, during the Biden, they're very upset with Netanyahu leaking to always Barack Ravi. They're very upset with him, et cetera, et cetera. Why would anyone ever believe a word that comes from Trump or Steve Witkoff or anyone else associated with this administration after they've gloated about the fact that they were using diplomatic negotiations as a tool to effectuate, to help kick off this war? I mean, I'm seeing this. I'm curious your thoughts about this, Dave. I've seen this analysis that Trump was persuaded, this might be true, was persuaded by Bibi that he would have a better hand going into negotiations with Iran if he let Israel start this war and participated, as we've indicated, in starting this war. That is the most idiotic, insane possible analysis I can imagine. I guess it's possible.
Yeah, I don't always agree with Crystal Ball, especially on things like economics, but I think she's hitting it out of the park right here, especially because of the fact that the most ignored thing about this is how it impacts other negotiations that are going on around the world, maybe with proxy wars, rattling sabers with nuclear-armed parties. Yeah, I'm talking about Ukraine and Russia especially. How is Putin ever going to believe that this administration is serious about securing a peace there and getting disengaged from it if this is how it behaves? It basically duped Iran into thinking that they weren't going to get struck soon. There was going to be negotiations the next day after this strike happened, actually. They were scheduled, I think, in Bahrain. So for this to just go unnoticed as an angle, you know, it really escapes me why it's being so underplayed, like how this will affect other negotiations. It just doesn't seem to bother the neocons and empire builders, but it's a good point.
Possible that he really is that absolutely idiotic. But, you know, what do you make of that? Is that really what happened here? And what do you make of this report that supposedly, oh, he was the cooler head and said you can't take out the supreme leader?
Yeah, well, I'd say Trump might be that idiotic. And, you know, he has, again, we're kind of speculating here, but he has bragged in the past several times about how he's so smart for keeping these hawks around, because then that puts all these pressure on people to come to the negotiating table.
That's why he said he had John Bolton.
Yeah.
Yeah, his example was John Bolton, who killed the deal with North Korea. Like, that was his example of it being like such a stunning success or something like that. It reminds me of like when people brag about the Abraham Accords and what a success they were, and you're like, oh yeah, they worked out so great. They led to this. Like, how, I don't even understand how you could, you know, it'd be one thing if peace swept the Middle East after the Abraham Accords and you go, oh, okay, maybe they played a role, but it's been a nightmare all across, the worst fighting that we've had there in 20 years. And so, since our last disastrous invasions. But so, you know, look, I mean, it seems to me like there's a couple possibilities here. None of them are good. One of the possibility is that, which I think is plausibly the case, that Israel betrayed Donald Trump, and then this is just his best way to deal with it. Like, essentially, Donald Trump was trying to negotiate, and then Israel just went ahead and launched the attack anyway. And then as a response to that, Donald Trump would rather look strong and go, no, I was in on it. It was our plan all along. Or the other possibility, which I think is more likely, is that he was never negotiating in good faith, and it was a distraction, and Donald Trump was in on it. Either way, we're at the same place.
Yeah, this is a really good point, and people will put that line in different places. I believe mostly in a combination between those two. I do think there were some genuine overtures to solidify this deal at first, but it broke down along the way. The Zionist lobby had the ear of Trump, got influence, and at some point he was complicit in this designed ploy to draw the U.S. into war, you know, subdue the threat of Iranians, you know, hunkering down into the bunker, being aware that an attack was coming. I do think that happened at some point, but I do think also there were some people that genuinely wanted peace in the beginning. So, man, this is going to be debated endlessly, but the point remains that we're in the same place, as Dave said. The U.S. is supporting Israel with intelligence and weaponry and arms. And again, if that wasn't designed to be the plan, where Israel struck and then the U.S. took partial credit, Trump would be irate because this would be undermining his stated public foreign policy aims. He said, I want to stop a war with Iran. I want to negotiate, curtail their program through a JCPOA-like arrangement, but more attuned to Trump's desires. To what extent that he led this is anyone's guess, but I tend to think that Israel acted opportunistically, drew Trump in, and Trump had no other way than to try to pretend like this was a victory and save face at the end, even though that is an America First betrayal of the largest magnitude.
Yeah.
You know, either way, even if Donald Trump was betrayed by the Israelis and then just took their side in public, which has happened with different presidencies over the years. It's certainly happened with Bill Clinton after Camp David. So maybe that's the case. But then either way, then you're just so weak and pathetic that even after the Israelis betray you, you'll still come out and catch their back and support them in this war. Well, that's just as bad from the Iranian perspective and from any reasonable person's perspective. Yeah. So, you know, we don't know. We'll probably find out more about this over time. But either way, in effect, it's the same thing. You know, and then we're left in the position where you're supposed to sit here and justify a sneak, aggressive, preemptive attack. Like somehow you're supposed to feel like you're the good guys in an absolute war of choice against a country that does not have nuclear weapons. Let's get real here. The only country in the Middle East who secretly has nuclear weapons is Israel. Yes. Iran is a member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Israel is not, and they have nuclear weapons.
Yeah, and
yeah, that's the ultimate irony here, too, is that Israel will not admit they have nukes, presumably because they don't want inspections, and they're not part of the international agreement that dictates inspections of parties that have nukes, but Iran is. And Tulsi Gabbard, again, Trump's hand-picked national intelligence director, said openly that there's no evidence Iran has even reconstituted or reactivated its nuclear weapons program. Since, I believe she said 2004. We've had all this propaganda saying Iran can't have a nuke. Israel must be able to defend itself. Israel has the right to defend itself. All this nonsense you hear all the time. You never hear Israel doesn't have a right to a nuke and Iran has a right to defend itself. You never will hear that because of how bad the corporate media is for Israel, the Israel lobby, and how much influence it wields over our elected officials.
Unbelievable.
A rogue nation attacking six of their neighbors as we speak and are not part of the non-proliferation.
Right. Yeah, we actually have
cool with that.
We have a non-compliant nuclear member of the NPT actually attacking a member of the NPT who is far more in compliance with said international treaty. Hey, whatever. What do I know, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Listen, getting drawn into this war is a disaster for the U.S. A lot of people feel betrayed by Trump right now because of the rhetoric in his campaign was so different. You know, that video of Trump in, I believe, 2012 that's going around now where he harangued Obama for being weak, for not negotiating with Iran. Actually, that eventually did, amount to the JCPOA, probably the best thing Obama did in an entire presidency of foreign policy disasters, if you ask me. But Trump's rhetoric has always not matched his actions when it came to foreign policy. Now, I will say, in terms of relativity, his first term was better in terms of foreign policy than many presidents. I mean, the line his supporters always used was, he didn't get us into a new war. Well, he did escalate the wars in Syria and Yemen, and at times the bombing in Afghanistan in that first term, but ultimately they were right. He didn't open up a brand new theater. Now, he has. This is his theater. He's funding it. He's trying to kind of speak out of both sides of his mouth a little bit, like Dave said there, saying, hey, this was Israel's decision. I didn't want it to happen, but now there's a bunch of Iranians dead, and now there's going to be more dead if they don't agree. Trying to frame this as if this is actual, legitimate diplomacy that will pay dividends in the end. It will pay off. They'll come to the table and say, oh, we don't want, to be disarmed militarily, we'll disarm voluntarily. Well, I don't think that they can trust the U.S. And like I said earlier in this video, the big angle that's being missed by so many is how this impacts peace negotiations with Russia. Who thinks that the U.S. is a trustworthy partner when they're still bankrolling Ukraine and they act this way between Israel and Iran? If I'm Putin, there's no way I can trust this administration now. And that's devastating because that theater, a lot of people had reason to believe would come to a sooner halt once Trump got in office. Now, to the extent some people didn't believe that, fair enough. It looks like your side's prevailing right now. But I do want to hear from what you guys think. Do you think that how much culpability do you think Trump has in this attack, and the U.S. has, and how much of the negotiations with Iran were a ruse? Was it the whole thing? Were there some in the initial stages that were legitimate and then it was hijacked by Israeli regime change policy? Let me know in the comments down below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Please consider supporting me via being a YouTube member or a Patreon patron to support the channel. I'd really appreciate that. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. I'll catch you in the next one.